Here's what we're going to do. I want to start in the NFC North. I think that's more important than anything. And we'll start with the Lions. I want to know, Jeff, who you think the most underappreciated or underrated player is going to be this season for the Detroit Lions. And we'll get to the Vikings, Bears, Packers shortly after.
I got an interesting one. Jerry Jacobs. And I'll tell you why. Undrafted free agent who I think doesn't get enough credit because, again, you look at undrafted free agents, typically they don't turn out to be, and a lot of the NFL is undrafted, fun fact. But for Jerry Jacobs, I don't think he gets the recognition he deserves because last year the whole conversation was centered around Jeff Okudah. Jeff can't cover anybody. He's a liability. He's always hurt. But who was the consistent corner last year who, again, had a couple PIs, questionable calls, but still for the most part, he was the Lions' best pass coverage corner they had. And I know this year the secondary looks way different. You added CJ, Emmanuel Mosley, Cam Sutton, Brian Branch. But I'm telling you, Jerry Jacobs, and if you follow him on Twitter, you know how much he's been talking lately about the respect he thinks he deserves. I think Jerry Jacobs is extremely underrated because when I think of underrated, I think of a player that's not rated as high as he should be. You look around the roster, Aiden, James Houston, these guys, impactful players, I think they're all rated accordingly. I don't think Aiden's underrated. Someone who doesn't get talked about enough that I think has a significant impact to me is Jerry Jacobs and can be, especially in the secondary. Because Emmanuel Mosley, I think everybody expects Emmanuel, Cam Sutton, these guys to take over and be your both outside corners. And then you have a slot and CJ Gardner-Johnson. But I think Jerry Jacobs, the more training camp approaches, you're going to hear more about him. That's my most underrated player right now on the Lions.
I think the most underrated player is Jared Goff. And I'm not looking at this of, what does this town think of Jared Goff? I'm going national. Who's an underrated player on this football team that isn't getting enough or doesn't get the recognition we believe he deserves? And let's really look at the media. What have they done the last 3 months?
Mm-hmm.
Talked about Dan Campbell. Biting off kneecaps, motherfucker. Right? Brad Holmes talking about how excellent of a GM he is. They talk about the drafts, Aiden Hutchinson. Mm-hmm. You don't hear much about Jared Goff. You don't hear much about how Jared Goff has revitalized his career in Detroit.
There's been more talk of Hendon Hooker.
Thank you.
Now that he's been drafted.
Yes.
Than there has been in recent media for Goff.
It's always about the backup.
So maybe to us in this room, and those of you watching at home because you love the Lions, maybe you don't see him as underappreciated or underrated. But I do. I think it is so clear and evident. Mm-hmm. You see not Hassan Reddick, goddamn it, Louis Reddick.
Yep.
Go on the Rich Eisen show. Talk about Dan Campbell. Talk about Brad Holmes. Talk about Aiden Hutchinson, Gardner Johnson. Talking about all these pieces that they have. And that they could win with Jared Goff. I think Jared Goff is the most underrated player on this team right now.